So today we're continuing our unit on the age of exploration, and in this one video we're actually going to do lesson 9.3 and 9.4 together because I think they're going to be kind of short. So first we're going to look at the triangular trade. And so basically what has happened thus far is we've talked about exploration and these explorers and how Europe has gotten pretty rich because of the Renaissance, and so they feel the need to explore the rest of the world, gain new territory, try to make lots of more money. And so these European nations that are sending explorers have set up colonies here in the New World, and they want to try to maximize them for their financial profit. And so what gets set up is a system of trade where goods move from the Americas to Europe to Africa and then back to America. And even though the arrows kind of go in this direction here, goods actually flow both ways across this triangle of trade, hence the very clever historical term, the triangular trade. And so you can see you've got a lot of natural resources coming from the Americas right here. So you can see that things like fish and lumber, tobacco are all going to Europe. These are all raw materials, things that Europeans don't really have readily available. And so Europe turns those raw materials into things that it can manufacture, goods that it can sell people that are desirable throughout Europe. And so what Europe does is they send iron products to Africa. Africa is a developing part of the world this time, maybe not quite on par technologically with Europe, and so those iron products are sent down to Africa. What Africa does is they send slaves and gold to the Americas, and so that gets sent across the Atlantic Ocean here. This is what's called the Middle Passage, specifically in relation to the movement of slaves, humans, across the Atlantic Ocean. This would be an incredibly hard journey. These humans, not just slaves, humans, were packed into ships so tightly that many did not make it across the Atlantic Ocean alive. Many died because of the extreme harsh conditions in this Middle Passage. But nevertheless, these slaves and gold get sent to the Americas, where those slaves are employed to produce those raw materials. But it also works in reverse a little bit, where you've got rum and iron products being sent from the Americas to Africa, and also Europe sends tea, spices, tools, etc. to the Americas. And again, that's all helping with production of natural resources here. So in summation, we've kind of got natural resources being produced here in the Americas, more finished goods in Europe, and then, of course, slave labor coming from Africa. And again, the Middle Passage is an important term for us to know. As we move on, there are a couple of important systems that you could get confused, but they're not the same thing. And so I kind of want to make sure that we get the distinction between the two right now. The first system that we're going to talk about is the plantation system. And the plantation system is what gets set up in these colonies. And this plantation system is really an economic system. See if I can write economic a little bit better than that. There we go. Econ. So this is the practice of growing cash crops. That's crops that you can grow to sell, things that have monetary value. Growing cash crops at a large scale on major estates. So these colonies are organized into estates, so people own large plots of land that they live on that have huge bits of farmland, and so they grow cash crops on them. Agriculture makes up most of the economy. Again, these were producing raw materials here in the Americas, and they're trading those to Europe and Africa. The consequence of this sort of system is that it heavily depends on slave labor. You've got to have cheap labor to be able to produce all these raw materials to make a profit on it. And these English settlements, or some of them were English, some of them, of course, Portuguese, Spanish, etc. But the English ones are financed by joint stock companies. Essentially, these companies are taking a risk by investing so much in the New World, but they minimize their risk by not having one person put all of their life savings into this endeavor of trying to fund production of raw materials in the New World. So they sell off small pieces of their company to investors. So you've got a large group of investors who each own a stock or a portion of these companies. And so it's a team of investors working together to fund the mission to make money in America. And so when they do make a profit, those profits are then distributed to all of those owners who have stock in these companies, not unlike how the stock market works today. And so this is in contrast to the encomienda system. And the encomienda system is somewhat economic, but I'd say it's more of a social system in the way that it works, in that it's very much based on race. And this is going to happen more in the southern parts of the Americas. So we're talking more like this section, not so much North America. And so the way the social system works is you've got the peninsulares at the top, and these are Spaniards who are born in Spain. So again, this is a primarily Spanish sort of structure. So you've got these peninsulares who are Spaniards born in Spain, and they're at the top of the social structure. Underneath that, you've got Creoles. That's Spaniards who were born in the New World, so they didn't start in Europe, but they are of 100% Spanish descent. Beneath that, you've got the mestizos. That's the Spanish and Native American heritage. So that means someone who is the child of a full Spaniard and a full Native American. Beneath that, you've got Native Americans, and then beneath that, slaves. And so the way this system works is that it sets up the social structure, but also what you get is these peninsulares at the top can employ these Native Americans rather cheaply or as slave labor. In fact, you can even think about this encomienda system as something similar to the feudal system, because the peninsulares at the top do provide protection for those laborers, the Native Americans, the slaves, who would then return loyalty, production of goods, etc., to those who are at the top of the social structure. So you can see, like feudalism, this is kind of a social and maybe even a little bit of a political system. Some economics in there, because we're dealing with the production of materials. But in the Spanish territories, this encomienda system is really something that drives everything. You can see it's really based on race. Next, we'll move on to the causes and effects of exploration. And this one's going to be really quick. A lot of these make sense, and we've kind of already touched on them already, but I want to make sure that we really know what are the causes and effects of exploration into the quote-unquote New World. And so here we can see causes: increased funds available because of the Renaissance. We've already touched on that. Mercantilism. This is a new term, even though we've already talked about it a little bit already in this video. Mercantilism is this economic ideology where a kingdom or a nation attempts to export more than it imports. It means sending out more goods than it brings in, which includes claiming colonies for raw materials and government-controlled trade. So basically the way that this mercantilism works, I'll give you an example over here. Oops, again, getting a little willy-nilly with my pen. So if we slide back over here, you'll be able to see that, let's say England over here in Europe wants to engage in some mercantilist policies. So what they're going to do is they're going to claim some territory over here in the New World. And so they've got some colonies over here. And so they're going to ship a bunch of people over here to settle these colonies. And so these colonies are going to produce all these raw materials. They're going to make corn and wheat and tobacco and all of this stuff. And they're going to send all of it back to the mother country. And of course, the mother country is profiting off of all of this production, and they'll buy this stuff back from the colonies rather cheaply. And the colonists are pretty happy because they're making some money and they're doing, great new things in the New World. But the home country is getting pretty fat off of this cow. And so what they do is, because they have some means of production here, they turn those raw materials into finished goods, and guess what? They sell them back to the colonies, which is a little crazy. So a country like England goes from just producing goods within its borders, rather small, for its people, to creating huge access to new raw materials in the New World, bringing it back, and then making finished goods and then selling it back for even more profit back to the New World. And so this is mercantilism. This is these countries exporting more than they import, trying to use their colonies to make as much money as possible. And then finally, we've got the 3 G's: God, glory, gold. Typically, we connect these with the conquistadors from Spain, but really it can apply to exploration in general. And these are kind of the 3 main motivators for exploration. We want to spread the good news of our religion, Christianity. We want glory for ourselves. We want to go down in history. And then gold, we want to make some money. And then here's the bottom line. Here are the effects. And really, it's kind of a tale of 2 different continents here. For America, the effect of all this exploration, of the Columbian exchange, of the triangular trade, is we get the introduction of new diseases into America. This is probably the most profound effect, is that we've had all these Europeans come in and they bring their diseases with them to America, and the natives just have no immunity for it. And so the introduction of disease in America just completely undercuts the native population. Thousands upon thousands of Native Americans die because of these diseases. And then secondly, America becomes subjugated to European control and colonization. Like we talked about in the first video on the Columbian Exchange, these folks have been living there for thousands of years, had developed complex civilizations, and the Europeans come in and take control of it like they had never been there before. For Europe, they get a much improved diet because all these new food products that are coming from America are coming back to Europe, and so Europeans are eating a lot better, which means they've got improved health, longer lifespan. So this is actually a pretty big one for them. And then we can ponder, maybe this leads to the Industrial Revolution. We've got greater food production. We're getting the spread of ideas. We're fueling more and more economic growth. And so many historians think that this sparks the Industrial Revolution, one of the next big things that happens in history, where we start to produce at a much larger scale. We get automation, we get factories, all of those sorts of things that are made possible because Europe explored and expanded. And so for our most important, we can see we've got the Atlantic slave trade, the Middle Passage, the encomienda system, plantation system, don't get them confused, joint stock company, mercantilism, hugely important, and then lastly, the Industrial Revolution.